let's try that again since it wasn't working. So I'm gonna fix my 19 Teens Era winter coat. The seam has split here. Hi. I'm having a little technical difficulties, but I think it's working now. Okay, here's my 19 Teens coat, and I'm gonna fix this split seam, and then we're gonna study it a little bit after I'm done with that. The way great. I'm glad the stream is now working because it was not working previously. Anyway, the way I fix a split seam like this is I just put my thread on one side of the seam and then on the other side so that the needle goes in between the old seams. That way it is completely undetectable once it's done, and you can't tell where the old thread has rotted off. Here you can see the thread. It's just tearing apart because it's so old. And I'm using silk thread to resew it, and I want to use silk thread because I don't want to add any polyester to a coat this old, and also I don't want to use anything that is too strong, because the reason why a coat like this, yeah, it's called a ladder stitch, yeah. A coat this old, the way it stays, intact and doesn't start to tear in the fabric is that the stitching isn't as strong as the fabric itself. I don't actually see the old holes in this because the mohair is so thick that I can't really tell where the old stitching holes are. Let me turn the camera around and hopefully there. There, you can see the fabric. This is really like thick plush, and the fabric itself is a fairly loose weave. So I'm just stitching it into that fabric on that fold. As long as I stay on the fold, it doesn't really matter where it ends up exactly. But yeah, if I was stitching on something like silk or something where you could see the stitching holes, then yeah, by all means use the old holes so that you don't create new stress points for the fabric. But fabric like this is fairly strong. Like, the thing that it will wear out from is that the plush will eventually like get some wear to it. There actually isn't much on this coat, like not even on the hip area. So, because like mohair is super strong, much stronger than regular wool, we don't have really anything this strong nowadays, which is a shame because this is a lovely fabric. this is fabric, not a fur. It is woven. It was made to mimic a fur coat, but it is still a woven fabric. This is actually the same plush that would be used in old teddy bears. So that's why it's like super soft and nice to wear. And now I am at the end of the sleeve point. So here I'm at the armpit area. So I just change directions and continue stitching it so that the new direction of this seam gets kept so that it stays. And there. All done. And now you can't see the under things anymore coming out. I don't remember if the other arm had a hole. It might have. No, it doesn't. But here is actually a tiny, tiny bit of wear on this side. And, oh, sorry. I'll wipe my camera to try to get it to focus better. Is that better? I'm using my phone because I couldn't figure it out on my proper camera, so it's not as good as my real camera. But here is the other armpit. Here you can see an old repair. Like, I think the fabric might have actually split there a little bit because you can see the stitches. But this is done by somebody else, not me. And the stitching is rather crude in this one. Oh, and there's another seam split. I'll fix that in a little bit. But here, I'll turn it around so that you can see the one I just did. So I just stitched that seam right there. There's a bit of lint coming out from there. But other than that, you can't tell where it's stitched on. Let me try to focus it. There. Okay. But now back onto this side. So I'll need to fix that one. And here you can see on the inside of the seam, here's the actual lining fabric. And here's a wool wadding. It's fairly intact, actually. Like, you can still, it stays as a fabric, even though it doesn't, like, have much structure to it. And that's what makes this coat so warm. Yeah, cameras do not like black, especially not like just phone cameras. My proper Canon can do a little bit better, especially with the soft boxes around here, but yeah, black is a nightmare to photograph or film. It's horrendous. And of course I like sewing with black. Yeah, this is a really warm coat. Like, I can easily wear this in like -20 weather, and like, I mean, I'll freeze my face off, but other than that, like, I'll be fine. This is one of the warmest coats I have. I actually have a few vintage fur coats, and this is nearly as warm as those are. It's not quite as windproof as a fur because of the woven structure. Like, if it's super windy, you can kind of feel it a little bit through, but not anything like a modern coat. I have like modern wool coats are nothing compared to this. This is so warm. This seam is actually a little bit trickier because it doesn't have the same like wear on the edge, so that I can't quite tell where I'm stitching, but I'll do my best. And I keep dropping my thread off my needle. Of course, I could get just a longer thread, but that would be way too easy. Yeah, modern coats aren't really, because first of all, there's so much plastic in them. Even like if you get a proper wool coat, it's not going to be as warm as a historical coat because the wool, the fabric itself is not that dense. Like you can't get as dense fabric as they had 100 years ago, or even like 50 years ago nowadays in the fabric store. But what you can do to help it is do what they did in this. So add a wool wadding, or even just a cotton wadding would help, but wool, of course, is the best. And then use something for the lining, even if it's a rayon, not a silk, but use something that is a natural fiber and it will help a lot. But yeah, modern coats are horrible. They're annoying. You end up hot and sweaty and then also cold. Or you end up cold and sweaty at the same time, which is really fun. So yeah, I'm not a fan of modern coats, especially the plastic ones. I do have a few nice wool coats, like made by small sustainable brands that I really like. But those are like, I'd call them those like mid-season coats, not like proper winter coats. And for my sewing thread, I'm just using the Gutermann silk because that's what I can find locally. So it's not the strongest. Like, I wouldn't want to use this for anything like that needs a really, really strong seam. But because this really doesn't need to be, it will eventually wear out, but like it's not gonna break immediately. And I rather have it break on the thread than on the fabric. So it ends up kind of just being a plus. Yeah, I would even say that like fabric quality hasn't just lessened in the last 20 years. I think the biggest shift was from like the late 90s to sometime in the mid 00s, because like I back in the late 90s, you could still get fabric in so many different qualities that you can't get it nowadays. And there was so much more natural fibers and even like different variations on rayon, even though that's a man-made fiber, but at least, you know, it's not plastic. And so many qualities that you just can't get nowadays. And also like back in the early or like mid 90s, late 90s when I started sewing, um like it was actually cheaper to make your own clothing. Nowadays, there's no way you can actually like make stuff cheaper, unless like we're talking about a ball gown, or anything like a designer couture item, or anything with really a lot of tailoring, because then the work hours are going to be the thing that if you do them yourself instead of paying somebody to do them, then you can get it cheaper. But like regular clothes, yeah, it's always going to be more expensive to make your own. More satisfying, but more expensive. There. Now she's all fixed up. I'll lay her down on the floor because my house is in the middle of renovations, and that's why, like, my clothing rack is now behind me in the dining room instead of where it's supposed to be. So, yeah, that's really the only place I have room on the floor is right now. So I'm just going to throw it on the floor, and then I'll pick you guys up and then we'll look at it. There we go. Okay, here she is. Now, actually, the light is showing quite well the shape. But yeah, she buttons on the side and quite low. The buttons start like at bust height, at about apex level, and then go down only a little bit. And then there's one more button up here underneath the collar, so that if the collar is kept open, and then these sides kind of fold like that so that then you can wear it with a scarf, then that one button is hidden completely by the collar. The collar has one button, but then this can also be worn so that the collar closes up like this and creates this kind of asymmetrical, like, scarf kind of neckline. This coat is probably from around 1915. Could be slightly earlier, could be slightly later. This kind of style was basically in fashion throughout the 19 teens, so it's not very, like, specific to a certain year. But about mid-teens is my guess. This is actually just lint, so even the button loops don't really have a lot of wear to them. There you can kind of see that the plush has kind of like worn out a little tiny bit, but it's like it still presents itself really nicely. And here, like with the really harsh lights on this, you can kind of see, well, you can see lint, but also you can kind of see that the fabric isn't super dense. It's mostly just that because the plush, like, fibers on the mohair just kind of fill it out. But it's not like velvet is much, much more dense than this. And the lining this is some sort of blend. I would want to say this is some sort of man-made fiber. I mean, it might have some linen in it, or possibly cotton. But it definitely is one of those early man-made fibers. Not plastic, but, like, it's not a silk. And that's one of the reasons why it's still here. And here on the interior, you can see that they've just catch stitched this bottom hem. And they haven't attached the lining on it at all. Like, there's no broken stitches around here, nothing. It has never been sewn on. And then here's the wadding. And they've just left it like separate here. They've done a little bit of like some sort of kind of pad stitching or just big basting stitches on the wadding to keep it like intact. This is I think a cotton gauze that's covering the wool wadding. And then here at the corner, there is this is almost like a jute. Like I don't even know for sure what this fabric is. But they've used this for the stiffening for the entire... Wait, does it go all the way? Yeah, it goes all the way on the side. So it's kind of a reinforcement for the placket, even though the button loops on this side are just sewn on top. So it's just to keep the edge nice and crisp. But it does stay nice and crisp even now. And then there is a pocket on the inside. This is the only pocket there is on this coat. This doesn't have any pockets on the seams. And then here in the armpit area, this is the only like real wear to the lining, is at the armpit area. I've been meaning to fix this, but I never get around to it. Maybe one of these days. And the sleeve lining is stitched on top with these big ass stitches. And here they've like machine stitched the wadding onto the here so that it doesn't start like moving around in the sleeve. And it stayed in place well. Like, there are no real bald spots here. It feels even all the way out. On the other side, again, we have damage at the armpit area. And there, the stitching has come out on the lining a little bit. And here you can see, here they didn't even do a gauze. They just put the wadding. And that's like straight stitched onto the lining. Yeah, this is a really nice coat. It's well made. And I think this has been worn quite a bit, but it still doesn't like show much wear. I mean, I've been wearing this coat for quite a bit and it still doesn't show any wear from me either, so. There's the only like other bald spot that I can see. This is kind of a weird place because this is like at waist level. I wonder if the owner had like a belt there that she liked to wear that rubbed against it or something, because like this is not, like hip area is lower. And I would like assume that you would get wear on your hip area. A bag might like rub against it or something. But no. And here you can see that the buttons are just stitched through the lining. Let's see. Yeah, here's the same edge reinforcement. Let me see if I can get all the way to the button. At least on the wadding side, there isn't any extra reinforcement. Let's see if we can go underneath the wadding. Yeah, there's no extra reinforcement for the buttons. It's just stitched through the lining, the wadding, and the main fabric. And it's really weird that they left even this, like, seam, the edge raw. This jute is just coming out. But, hey, it's worked for 110 years, so I guess it will work for now. And here is the edge. Here's the outer fabric. And there's some lint that's gathered there. So this is the selvage edge. They used the selvage for the front. And I think that's just a ginormous catch stitch that they didn't even, like, put down properly. I mean, it's worked, so why bother doing anything more with it? I wonder if this is actually machine stitching. No. No, it's hand stitching. Yeah, they've just kind of stitched it with a, like, weird kind of almost like a zigzag, but it's done by hand, and they've just, like, butted the seams together, basically. Is there anything else you'd like to see about this coat? Like, any details? Here, this is interesting. Here's the seam. This is the front piece, and this is the back piece. The center back has a tuck, I think. Yeah, they've just done a big-ass tuck on the center seam. Huh. Wonder why they've done that. Anyway, this edge, they've folded it over, but they've only stitched the very edge. Like, there's no broken stitch lines or anything. Like, this has never been stitched down. This has just been folded over and pressed. Probably just with steam or hand or something, because the plush is still plushy. And then there's a ginormous cut. Like, I think they did a button from this part. I think that's kind of neat. It's really weird to see how big of a difference in the seam allowance there is. Like, there's this big seam allowance on the back piece, whereas the front piece barely has any. And I thought at first this was like a stitch line, but no, it's not stitches. That's just stuff from the fabric coming out. And a lot of lint in the seam. But yeah, this fabric on the inside is really interesting. It's really coarse. It's almost like resembles like a really almost like horsehair, but of course not as stiff. Like, this is really pliable and nice. Huh. And I can't quite make out the weave pattern. Can you guys figure that out? Is that... It looks maybe like a twill, but it doesn't have like a diagonal direction to it. Huh. Anyway, interesting. Yeah, other than that, this coat is in really beautiful shape. The outer fabric doesn't really have any damage to it. even like the elbow area, you can kind of see like crease lines. But it's just creases. Like there isn't any like plushy fibers missing. It's just creases. But it is kind of fun that it has the crease lines. Yeah, you're probably right. It's probably a tabby wave. Oh, and here the lining is worn out at the cuffs. There it has a bit of, I think, bias binding. Yeah, this is bias binding. That they finished it, the turn cuff with. Because there's like this separate like false turn cuff that's been stitched down here. Which I think is kind of interesting that through all that trouble, since they didn't even like put buttons on it or anything. Like, you can't really even tell that there is a false turn cuff there. I don't know what the point of that was, but that's what they did. And here the fabric doubles. Like you can see a bit of a turn there. And that is stitched down before the lining is stitched onto it. Here the stitching has come loose. Oh, here you can see that it's actually, the lining fabric has been doubled for the cuff area, or the false cuff. Huh. I wonder why they did that. Oh, now I get it. This line is stitched here originally, so I think they accidentally made the sleeve too short, and then they just lengthened it with this piece so that it makes like a false turn cuff, but it's actually just lengthening the sleeve. Which is kind of an interesting mistake because these are like not long sleeves. They are like exactly wrist length. And I'm only 5'4". Like, I'm not tall. As for the collar, it has on the lining side, it has this ginormous machine stitched like zigzag pattern. But there is nothing else in the collar other than, I think there's again that jute fabric. It feels the same. And you can kind of see fibers poking out. This is not like the regular lint. This is some fibers poking through. And they don't really come off. Yeah, I think this was homemade, or like, if this was homemade, this was made by somebody who really knew what they were doing, or it was made by a professional seamstress. But definitely, like, there is no label. There's never been one. If this was, like, made by somebody who was more professional about it, who actually did this, like, as a job, like, other than a home seamstress that was working, there would be some sort of label present. Coats of this era typically do have labels, especially bigger brands, but even smaller brands, like even just like tailoring shops, they usually had like at least a little written label. But it would have been here at the neckline. This is where they typically had them, even just the like handwritten labels. But there's never been one. So yeah, I would say this is either homemade or made by a very good seamstress. I mean, obviously, this is very good craftsmanship, but like it's not professional, or if it is professional, then it is somebody who did it as a very, very small business, probably just to increase their income, not somebody who would have done this like as a big business. The collar stitching, let me see. I can actually see better with the camera than I can with my naked eye. No, it's not through the plush. So I think it goes just through, because I can't pick up the jute fabric that's under there. Yeah, it picks up with this. So yeah, this is just the lining and the jute, and then the plush is applied separately. Yeah, it's folded on top and then stitched down. And then the button loop is put on top. Oh, and then the shoulder area, there is a tiny bit of padding here. And this is something like, it doesn't like pad out, obviously, because Teens Era doesn't have wide shoulders, but there is some stiffening here. Like I can put my hand through here and there's like, this is a hard bit. Don't know what they used as stiffening. And no, there isn't any breaks in the lining, so I can't look. Let's see if there's on the other side. No, no breaks. And it doesn't go past the, like, the sleeve line. It's just there at the very, very edge. It doesn't add really volume. I think it's just to make that shoulder seem a little crisper. Yeah, it could be the jute, but this is definitely feels thicker and also harder. Like this is fairly thick. I don't know if you can tell, but this is like maybe a quarter of an inch in thickness, like on top of the plush. And it is, especially here on the very edge in the back, it is quite hard. Then it softens out so that this part where it ends here at the middle of the shoulder, it isn't very hard at all. But then again, here at the very edge, here where you'd have your armpit hollow, there again, it's thicker and I can't even squish it with my hands this way. Like I could squish the plush, but the actual pad won't squish this way at all. Interesting. Like, I'm thinking, could it be some sort of felted wool? I don't know. It feels even too hard for that. Mystery. Yeah, X-ray vision would be very handy. And if the seam ever breaks there, I will be sure to post pictures and we'll find out then if that ever happens, that what is in there. I think that's everything I can think of to say about this coat, but like if you have questions, I'll wait for a little bit. And if not, then I'll go for this evening or day or morning or wherever you are in the planet. No problem. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was sort of impromptu. Next time I do a live, I promise I'll get my proper camera set up so that I don't have to like wiggle around with just one camera and like pressing the screen in one direction and the other, and you have to look at my chin and my ceiling and all kinds of weird stuff that you're not supposed to. But anyways, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again later. Bye.